Hi, Jeff Westfall here again with another mobility drill. Now, I use the word mobility instead of footwork because I intended to go through 3 dimensions. So if I'm on the ground doing jiu-jitsu or Southeast Asian martial arts, do harimau or capoeira, works on the ground, that's all mobility. Those are all mobility techniques and drills. When you're standing, you might call it footwork, but I don't like to separate them in my mind or in my curricula. So today's mobility drill is what I call the jackknife. Now the jackknife is just my name for something. A jackknife, for those of you who don't know, way back a long time ago was what they called a pocket knife, a folding knife. And jackknifing your body means piking at the hips. So I'm jackknifing my body. When I do a hip escape in jiu-jitsu, I'm jackknifing. Well, this particular technique lifts one of the legs and turns the upper body in such a way that it's always reminding me of a partially opened folding knife between my upper body, my core, and my leg. So the name is stuck. If it's not a great name, that's what I call it. Names just need to stick in your memory. They don't need to be perfect. If you listen to my podcast, The Martial Brain, you should go check it out. I do talk about terminology Nazis sometimes on my podcast about how people get silly about what a technique is called. Anyway, back to the subject, the jackknife. The jackknife uses what physics calls a moment arm. Now, a moment arm is a lever that is sticking out into space, and it's either acting as a dampener for momentum or is acting as an amplifier for momentum. So that, for example, if I swing a baseball bat that's a foot long, it's not going to have nearly the power that a baseball bat that is 2 feet long. That won't have nearly the power as a baseball bat that's 3 feet long. Yet they don't weigh that much different. In other words, the amount of force I generate with that 3-foot baseball bat is that percentage increase is going to be much greater than the percentage increase of the weight and from the 2-foot one to the 3-foot one. And that's because of the moment arm effect, the momentum. Moment arm has nothing to do with time, moment. It means, in fancy physics talk, moment means, to a degree, momentum. Now, let me give you one more example of a moment arm. When a tightrope walker is walking on the tightrope in the circus, and you see him holding the pole, that long pole means, if he holds his core firmly, that long pole means that it's very difficult to turn him in the direction of a cartwheel very quickly. Even if he starts to fall, it will be a slower motion than if he was just on the tightrope without the pole. So it enhances his ability to keep his balance without a lot of extra effort. One more is when you see a competitive archer shooting their bow, you'll see very often there is a steel stick sticking out about 2 feet from the front of the bow with a metal ball on the end. That's another example of a moment arm. And what that does is when they release the arrow, the bow has a tendency to deviate its angle right on release, either deviate up or deviate down. That ball on the end of that steel arm dampens, it inhibits that tendency for that bow to move. It holds it still even more than the person's grip holds it still. So that's an example of the moment arm acting to dampen movement, dampen momentum. And in the case of the tightrope walker, it's dampening sudden movement. We're going to do the same thing in this case with the jackknife, but we're going to do it with our leg. In future lessons, I'll talk about application, but today we're just going to learn how to do it. So if you watched my last video, you remember we talked about the 4-corner drill. Well, when you go with your right leg to your right front corner, you are right under where the jackknife goes. All you have to do is lift it off the ground. There is no certain height that's correct. It can be gently touching the ground with no weight, and it can be up pretty high. Now, as I come up with that leg, watch my upper body rotate to meet it a bit. I'm exaggerating only a bit. It rotates slightly as if I'm throwing a left hook. As a matter of fact, sometimes for coordination, I'll have my students throw a left hook in the air as they pick it up if I see they're having trouble feeling this slight rotation. What that rotation does is load you kinetically, loads you for a lot of different martial arts techniques we're going to look at later on. it also helps you with your balance. So if I am in a kicking stance and I pick this leg up and twist my body a little bit, I want to practice balancing on this foot and keeping it, not falling. And then being able to go back. And then balance. And then go back. You'll find that that twist will help your balance. When you get used to doing that, the next step is to add what I call the drift. Now what the drift is, I'm going to back up from the camera a bit here. The drift is from my position with the jackknife out, I drift forward on my one leg until eventually I have to step to catch myself. And what I like you to do is I like you to work on varying the duration of the drift. As you get better at this, you can make the drift take, sorry about that, take longer, or you can make it quick. This gives you a series of control knobs that allow you to cover more ground if you're running down an opponent, which is one of the things the jackknife is great for, is for running down an opponent who's backing up from you. Another thing it's great for is adding power to a kick, specifically a round kick, a Muay Thai style round kick, and we'll get into how to do that in a future lesson. It also gets into the opponent's head. If you've already intimidated him a little bit, maybe got his respect with some of your kicking power, the sound on the ground can have a startling effect. If you listen to my podcast, I talk on there in one of my episodes about bottom-up attention, which is something that pickpockets and stage magicians use. They do something startling or something funny or whatever to distract your attention, and then they do something else. Well, a lot of times that sound gets in your opponent's head. That's a secondary use of the technique, but I've found it to be very significant in my time. One more thing to talk about, and that is the amount of extension of your leg. Now, I have a tendency when I train to keep the leg out pretty long, nearly locked out, but not quite. But it's perfectly valid to have it up almost like I'm doing what everybody calls a leg check. I hate that word. I prefer a shield or a block. You're not checking anything, you're blocking it. Anyway, from here, I can still do the same thing. I can drift. If you can drift, you can kick. If you can drift, you can punch. And we'll get to that in a later video. I might be doing an oblique kick, which we do in some arts. And that can turn right into your jackknife. I may be doing a foot jab, a teep. And that easily turns with a subtle head movement. Boom, bring the head forward and diagonal. And you can pause, wait for the right moment, and take off with your attack. Another way that I'm not set up for here, I don't have a heavy bag, is if you hit a solid object with your round kick, boom, and you hit that target, your head can come forward, and it looks awkward in the air, but it feels great with Thai pads or a heavy bag. So don't look upon these last little bits here that I just showed you as instruction, more as previews of things to come. But I hope this gives you a little bit of an idea about this really interesting technique and concept that I call the jackknife. See you next time.